Hi there, my name's Sarah. I'm really excited to be considered for the Chief of Staff role at JBA Equities. So the question reads, tell us about a time when you got critical feedback or you pushed back on your boss. How did you handle it? So thinking about a time a few months ago when I was working at DET, I was the director of operations there. The funny thing about the title of director of operations, which is very similar to chief of staff, actually, it's a generalist role. And especially at a startup, you wear a lot of different hats. So as director of operations, one of the hats that I was wearing was actually product manager. So I was managing a team of distributed asynchronous engineers and designers from all different time zones. And so a few months back, we were doing 2-week sprints. And if you're unfamiliar with that is basically, we were iterating, testing, and launching new features for our platform in 2-week cycles. So at the time, our founder and CEO was actually spending about 80 to 90% of her time just on fundraising, which is pretty normal for a startup, especially, when they're fundraising. So she really had to be hands off on the day-to-day operations of the company, which meant that, me and actually our chief of staff, ironically, really had to step up and run the day-to-day operations every day and really only put the stuff on her plate that was extremely, extremely important. So it took some delegation, prioritization, and really understanding what she needed to review and what we could kind of take on our own. So I was managing engineering and product, as I said. So there was one issue where it was mostly on the back end, very technical. And it did result in a tweak on the front end. So, the front end is what the user will actually see. So it ended in this, it's a pretty small tweak. It had to do with like a scrolling button, basically, very small. And so in my mind, so on the back end though, it was a really big bug, and it took I think over one sprint for an engineer to spend all of their time just fixing this bug. They had to restructure and reorganize everything on the back end, and it did end up in that small tweak on the front end. So in my mind, I'm like, we have so many things, on our product roadmap. This is just one tiny little tweak on the front end. I'm not going to put this on the founder's plate. I'm just going to, green light it. Let's go. Let's fix this bug. It's a big issue. The scrolling bar on the front end is not a big deal. What ended up happening is we launched it at the end of the sprint, and our founder saw it and immediately took to the Slack channel with all the engineers and the designers. It was pretty frustrated. She was like, I don't like what happened? Like, it looked better before. And she was right. It did look better before, but it was a pretty small issue. So what I did is I called her up. I got her on the phone like immediately, and I was like, hey, listen, like don't involve the engineers and designers yet. We're gonna burn them out because I gave them the green light, right? So if all of a sudden they're getting these conflicting messages from leadership, that's how you get burnout, right? I mean, it's true. So I said, like, hey, stop, don't message them. Like, let me explain to you what happened. Let me explain to you exactly why I chose to green light this, why I chose to not put it on your plate. Why it was actually a bigger issue on the back end that really needed to be fixed. And I know there is this smaller, slightly uglier tweak on the front end, but in the grand scheme of things, especially with how fast we have to move at a startup, an early stage startup such as we were, this really doesn't need to be a big thing. And what we ended up finding out is that actually it wasn't a big deal. Our founder was actually kind of frustrated with fundraising, and that's totally understandable because fundraising is not easy. She ended up, just being like, I've had a really rough day and I might have just been a little, rough on them. I'm glad you said something. And then, we turned it into a teachable moment, a learning moment for all of us. And we made sure, the engineers were super clear on like next steps and that, they were doing great work, etc. So yeah, that's the story that I thought I'd tell you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for considering my application. I would love to learn more and get on a virtual coffee chat with you guys. And yeah, have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.